Hello and welcome. This is going to be another edition of HIPAA News for January 2022. I'm your host, Chris Reddick, and let's dive in. First, in our HIPAA news for the month, the rights of access. The rights of access is an aspect of HIPAA that too many covered entities don't take seriously. In particular, doctors or insurance companies must provide their patients with health records within 30 days of a request. The Office of Civil Rights, or OCR, investigates complaints about non-compliant entities. And one of the challenges with this is if a covered entity doesn't comply, they could face fines. And more importantly, if they are considered to be non-compliant, their information could be posted to the government board, basically the public shaming board, if you will, where the government actually posts what occurred, what fines were paid, what organizations were found to be non-compliant. And this could be one of the first search results that comes up for a covered entity. So if your particular entity or one of your customers or clients is needing to be HIPAA compliant and they're not, and they're found to be non-compliant by the government, by the OCR, they could actually have some of their very first search results for their company be this board of shame, if you will, that the government has. And there were 5 new companies added to this in the last month. And unfortunately, they were found to be, basically not timely resolving this request for medical information. So unfortunately, this is a really big deal. It's part of HIPAA. We have a great training series on HIPAA. I encourage you to take a look at it if you're not familiar with this. And with that, we'll talk about the next big piece of news. One of the things that we're seeing, and there's a news article out about this in particular, is that most employees of standard employers, so non-covered entities, think that the HIPAA privacy rule extends farther than it does. So what do we mean by this? Well, with the privacy rule, there are requirements for what information can be asked for and why a covered entity can ask for it and where it can be used and these type of things. There are restrictions on this PHI information. Well, this doesn't apply to employers. Employers have different rules, and please don't take this as legal advice or HIPAA-specific legal advice. It's not. Just understand that generally speaking, the employer, if they're not a covered entity, they don't have to comply with the HIPAA privacy rule. And a lot of employees think that they do. So this is kind of an interesting nuance. The OCR has gone and put out a detailed kind of posting, kind of elaborating on this so that whenever employees have any questions about this, they're going to be able to get answers and figure out that, hey, gosh, I guess the privacy rule doesn't apply to this employer. Now, the employee can still decide if they want to disclose questions about their health or etc. if they want. Of course, this has become a pretty major issue because of COVID. So you can imagine that a lot of folks that do or don't want to take certain vaccines, etc., not to mention other situations, they are trying to take advantage of the privacy rule and finding that it doesn't really cover this. Again, there are other rules that apply, but this is pretty interesting if you're in the HIPAA field or you are working at a non-covered entity and you're trying to figure out if this applies or not. So I'm sure there's also an interesting nuance for covered entities that are asking for this information for standard employees. So again, not legal advice, interesting information though about what's going on. And finally, what we wanted to share is that the director of the Office for Civil Rights, or OCR, is now Lisa J. Pino. And one of the things that is really interesting about her background is she has both a security and a health background. So she's an awesome fit for the role, just based on some of her experiences. She also was previously the Executive Deputy Commissioner at the New York State Department of Health. And she was in this role during New York's response to the COVID epidemic, in addition to other health programs. Now, depending on kind of your impression of how things went and what that situation was, you can kind of interpret how she's going to handle this role as OCR, potentially. And of course, with any kind of political situation, there are a lot of different roles that have their hands in the cookie jar. Lisa definitely has a very solid background to be taking on this role. One of the interesting things about the role itself and just the OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, is they don't just enforce HIPAA. They're also enforcing federal civil rights, religious freedom laws, Patient Safety and Quality Improvement Act, and the Patient Safety Rule. So it's not just HIPAA. In fact, HIPAA is probably considered within that group a relatively small part of what they do. But we certainly welcome Lisa to the role. Wish her all the best, and we'll be looking for any other noteworthy areas here that make sense to share about how she's going to be operating that department. And with that, that was your HIPAA news, and we'll see you in the next one in February.